It looks like most of our group has joined us, and so I know, Susan, you're going to kick us off for our annual meeting today.
Thank you, Tom. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for joining the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy at our annual members meeting. Thank you so much. We are here on Zoom again. Next year, I promise we'll be at Fallingwater, at the barn at Fallingwater. The good news is you don't have to have your hiking boots on for this meeting. You can have bedroom slippers on, for that matter, for this meeting if you'd like. But next year, come prepared to hike and go visit Fallingwater. But thank you all so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. I would like to recognize our CEO, Tom Saunders, and Tom will provide all of us with an overview and an update of what the Conservancy has been up to. It's been a very strange year, but believe me, this whole COVID and the whole COVID situation has not changed the energy and time involved on the part of the Conservancy staff. So Tom, if you would update us, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. I appreciate the introduction. Yes, you're right. It's definitely been a very unusual year for us and for every organization. But that said, our staff has just been wonderfully creative at figuring out ways to keep doing their work. And so the outcomes over the last year have been really good. So I'd like to give a quick overview of some of our projects that we've done in the past 12 months. And I'll start with land conservation. So in our land conservation group, we added a 50-acre property outside Ligonier. We bought this land and then we transferred it to the Loyal Hannah Watershed Association, and we have a conservation easement over it. For those who know Ligonier and the Laurel Highlands, as you are driving east on Route 30 into Ligonier, this is one of the properties on the north side. And at this point, we've protected most of that corridor along 30 and Loyal Hannah Creek. So this is a very nice addition. And north of the community of Ligonier, we acquired a 173-acre conservation easement on this incredibly beautiful property. So this land is still owned by the farmer. One of the wonderful things about conservation easements is that they stop development forever on the property, but they're still used by the owner, the family. They can be sold or transferred to other owners over the years, and they'll never develop. We are always doing land protection work up in the French Creek watershed north of Pittsburgh. And here we've protected this property, which is 35 acres close to LaBeouf Lake. And this property has wetlands on it that feed into this important glacial lake. So it's an area that we very much wanted to protect. And we are at this point well over 5,000 acres of protected land in the French Creek watershed. And then moving out to a different part of our region, this is a 560-acre property that we protected just west of Benezet. So for anybody who knows where the elk viewing area is, or if you know Bennett Branch, the stream that runs up near Benezet, this is one of our biggest acquisitions along that corridor. And Matt Marusiak up in that area did this land protection project over the course of about 2 years and closed it recently. Also sort of up that way in Clearfield County, we have acquired a conservation easement over 100 acres. And this one also was donated by someone who wants to see their land permanently protected. And so this conservation easement will stay on the title records forever as this property changes hands over time. The nice thing for us is that it is our first conservation easement in that county. And so we hope it will lead to others, because donated easements are among the best ways to protect properties. We have bought 120 acres in Bedford County, which we've added to Buchanan State Forest. That's also an area where we typically add more land protection every year or so. And then this is our biggest project of the year. So this is our most dramatic image. This is 1,200 acres south of State College near Penns Creek and adjacent to Bald Eagle State Forest. And this is a place also where we've acquired a conservation easement. This one was more of a commercial transaction, and we raised the money from foundations and and bought this easement, but this land will be forever permanently protected too. And then to change scale from our biggest property to one back here in Allegheny County, this is a historic log cabin out near Settlers Cabin, the county park, and near the Botanic Garden and the Panhandle Trail. And this one is just an acre, but it has this beautiful historic cabin on it that's sort of the centerpiece for all those properties around there. And in this case, we also did an historic preservation easement so that the structure would be protected. So those are our new land conservation additions over the last year, which seems like a lot considering that there is a pandemic. And then our stewardship staff, of course, has worked on the properties that we already own. And this has been a really busy year for them because our properties have gotten more use than ever during the pandemic. You're about to hear a brief presentation from one of our stewardship staff, Tyson Johnston, on the work we've been doing on the properties. But I'll give you just a little glimmer of that first, which is that we have done projects like planting native wildflowers at the Bear Run Reserve around Fallingwater. And this is a project we did to protect habitat and enhance habitat for pollinators. We've acquired our third farm for our farmland protection program that we've done over the last few years. This has been a really fun and interesting and challenging project where we have been buying farms, not just to protect the land, but also to then own these farms and lease them out to local farmers who will produce local foods, local organic foods on them, and increase the healthy local food supply into the Pittsburgh region. It's been a very complicated project, but this is the last of the farms we've acquired, and this is one of our stewardship staff doing maintenance work on the farm, and more of our stewardship staff working on the barn of this property. We've continued to maintain trails, in fact, more than ever during this last year, because, as I said, the use of public open spaces has just been so much higher as people were, shut in to a degree during the year and looking for places to get outdoors and to exercise and to walk and hike. We maintain 20 miles of trail just at the Bear Run Reserve. And then we've done projects like this one where this is up at Bennett Branch Forest, again, near Benezet that I mentioned earlier. And on this property, we had planted 20,000 new trees, and those included experimental chestnuts, hybrid chestnuts. And so we continue to monitor them for health and to do forest restoration and management work on that property. And then our watershed staff has just been incredibly productive. I don't usually put numbers and text like this on these presentations, but I thought it was just interesting to see the amazing outcomes from this group over the year. So they worked, for example, on 74 different sites where they were working to inventory and protect mussels, just to choose one of these. They did 16 acres of streamside trees. And because those buffers are pretty narrow, you can imagine that 16 acres of new trees along the streams is a lot. The tangible outcomes from that group are amazing. So we'll also have a presentation in a second about one of their projects, which is the canoe and kayak accesses that we create. But again, just to give a quick overview, this is one of those projects where we every year add more and more accesses for canoeing and kayaking in our streams in Western Pennsylvania. We've continued with projects like this one where we have taken a culvert under a road that was too small and didn't allow the aquatic life to pass through it or the water to pass through it well. And so we replaced those with either very big culverts or these overhead sort of bridges, so there's room for the stream to really pass under. And then we've done two projects that have been addressing abandoned mine drainage. And you can tell that the scale of these can just be kind of extraordinary. Pennsylvania has abandoned mine drainage sites still all over the state. And so for any place that we want to mitigate or remediate that situation, we put in holding ponds and take various approaches to essentially neutralizing the water and having the water come out clean and healthy at the end of the process. And then the watershed conservation staff has just continued with tree plantings all over the region. I have a number of examples of these. This is a socially distanced photo after the tree planting. These are all in different locations around Western Pennsylvania. And then I just wanted to end with this because the watershed group, like our heritage staff, also does a lot of work to protect specific imperiled species. And so this is a day that they were out doing a mussels inventory, and they kind of look like, you know, cartoon superheroes in this character, but they're going out to the site where they're going to work on the mussels. And then one good thing about the pandemic for us is that the kind of work we do is often outdoors and safe and distanced. And so even when the rules were really strict, our staff could get out and do things like this. Now, our natural heritage program has been hard at work too. You know that we have 30 scientists that work on protecting threatened and endangered species and their habitats. So one of the projects they worked on this year was inventorying Pennsylvania's barrens habitats. And these sites vary in location from Presque Isle to Scotia Barrens over near State College to our Sidling Hill property in Bedford County. But their barrens are an important habitat for ground nesting bees. And so we were working on both monitoring and protecting those locations. Our staff worked on projects like green salamander inventories, where the species lives primarily in sandstone in some counties, generally not far from the Youghiogheny River. We worked on issues for specific species, including bird species. So this is a Cape May warbler. And some of you all will know from social media last fall that there was essentially a giant migration that went on last fall, and that our staff was involved not just in monitoring and tracking that, but also sort of putting out the word to the community, mostly through social media, about how to keep the species safe as this was happening. And then our staff has studied places like the Susquehanna River, farther east of here, where we have surveyed the islands and their shoals. We discovered 26 rare plants. And then at some of our sites, and now we're at Ohiopyle State Park, we not only have done inventories, but we've actually done replantings to add Pennsylvania native species and actually restore habitat. And then important to our region, for those of us who are here around Pittsburgh, our heritage staff updated 10 natural heritage inventories over the last year for southwestern Pennsylvania. So some of these were very out of date. It gave us a lot of great new information. So our gardens and green space staff also managed to keep working all through the pandemic. And normally we plant 130 gardens. This last year we did 90 something, but I still think that's just an amazing output, considering a lot of constraints and considering that volunteers weren't able to work with us as much early in last year. So this is the largest of the gardens. This is the one at Fort Pitt Tunnel. We've continued to help support 45 community vegetable gardens, and we thought those were particularly important. You know, during the time when so many households and families were affected financially by the pandemic. And so while we don't take the lead role there, and we appreciate all the work that our partners do, we basically support it by providing seed material and technical assistance for the projects. And then we continued with 500 planters downtown and 400 hanging baskets, not quite the usual throngs of pedestrians that we were used to seeing last year. And we've continued with our work with local schools. We've now worked with 57 different schools in the Pittsburgh region. Mostly we're working with the early childhood centers at this point, but we do school grounds greening projects like this where we landscape you know, visible parts of the school, and often we create play spaces for the kids as a part of that process. We've planted over 1,000 new red buds during the last year along Pittsburgh's river banks, and then we've continued with our tree plantings in general, and these plantings last year brought us up to 37,000 trees. The Gardens and Green Space group also does something a little different from all the plantings, and this is done in partnership with our other programs like Heritage, but they do ecological assessments for the county parks. This year we did White Oak and Round Hill county parks, and we not only make recommendations for ecological work to be done there, But then the nice thing is it's implemented in the next year or two after that. And so it's creating very nice upgrades for the parks. And last, Fallingwater. And of course, Fallingwater was the most affected. So we closed entirely, as you all know, for a few months last spring. And then by summer, we opened for limited interior tours. We did a special campaign, and you all were so generous to us. And I should say that that campaign is still going on this year, because while we're open now, the revenues still are not what they were, since we're still limiting group sizes and not taking, and we're having longer spacing and time between tours. We don't take them through quite as quickly as we did before. So overall visitation is still lower than it was, and revenues are around 50% of what they were, but we're making our way back, and we really appreciate all you all are doing to help support Fallingwater during this time. We did open last June for interior tours, and now we're finally opened as of weekend before last we opened for exterior tours last year, and then we finally opened last weekend before last for interior tours. We've done a lot of virtual experiences, programming about all kinds of different interesting topics, in-depth topics during the pandemic. We've continued with some restoration work, but honestly, not quite as much as usual. It was just harder to do it, and we had to focus on sort of core operations and our finances at Fallingwater. But we have done some preservation projects like that one and like this one. And then one of the nice things that has happened is that we've developed all kinds of new and stronger partnerships. So while we were largely closed and we're focused on virtual content, this is just an example of one of those. This is a behind the scenes image of a day when we had the Pittsburgh Symphony Orchestra out at Fallingwater, and they actually aired a series of a limited number of their performers at different sites, including this one at ours. And then speaking of partnerships, in some ways, this is the nicest one of all. At Fallingwater, we also did food distributions for people in Fayette County who needed that during the pandemic and because of its economic issues that it created. And so while we're not experts in food distribution, we partnered with a group that is 412 Food Rescue. And we provided the site and the person power to help. And it's just been wonderful to do those food distributions monthly out at Fallingwater during this unusual time for our society. So Susan, thank you. And I am going to pass along the screen next to Tyson Johnson, who's going to tell us about some of our stewardship projects.
Tyson, if you can excuse me for just 1 second, we want to remind the people who are joining us on Zoom to type in any questions they have. And there's a question and answer on the bottom of your screen. And while we cannot get back to you right at the moment, because the numbers of people just prohibit that, we will get back to you with answers as soon as we possibly can. But Tyson, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Thanks, Tom and Susan. The outdoors and our properties became even more cherished during the pandemic. We observed increased use at most all of our preserves. At Tom's Run Nature Preserve in Allegheny County, the new 3-mile trail, parking area, and other amenities were largely completed last year. Here, a volunteer group from EQT is seen after finishing a day of invasive plant removal. And here's another view of the trail. You can see some of the benching work that was done to excavate a section of the trail. And it's also been blazed. So there are white trail blazes on the trees as you progress along that loop. Our volunteers come from all age groups. Here some scouts show off one of 2 benches that were built and a picnic table completed as part of an Eagle Scout service project. In Erie County, our contractors worked to remove several old buildings and a large dump in a forested area at our Lake Pleasant Conservation Area. And here you can see the final result. It looks like there was never any disturbance there at all. 2 new 2-car parking spurs were added on opposite ends of our South Branch French Creek conservation area, seen here near Union City. And all of these improvements were done to aid in the ecological integrity of our properties. And we also want to encourage responsible recreation there as well. And I will jump back. Another parking area was added at our West Branch French Creek Conservation Area, also in Erie County. And we had a few volunteer work days that included some additional trail maintenance there on that preserve. So now I want to introduce Eli Long, our watershed manager. Eli?
Thank you, Tyson. As so many have said recently, the pandemic was a time when folks were looking to the outdoors to get a fresh breath and to kind of escape the day-to-day. And one of the ways that WPC has been connecting people to nature through our programs was the Canoe Access Development Fund, which we have here at the Watershed Program. It's a funding program open to groups to develop or to improve canoe access or kayak access sites across the region. So I just wanted today to highlight 4 sites that were completed over the last year. They're located across Western Pennsylvania, and they're enjoyable and accessible for a number of skill levels. One thing to note as we go through is that the sites are linked to previously funded access sites, which allows the opportunity for paddling trips. And more information about that can be found on our website. So this site was completed in Beaver County. This project was completed by the Allegheny Aquatic Alliance on Connoquenessing Creek. The Allegheny Aquatic Alliance is one of our most prolific groups. They've completed 7 access sites across the region on Connoquenessing Creek in Lawrence, Beaver, and Butler County. Their accesses include stone walkways down to the river's edge, as well as very often educational kiosks and recycling bins for trash and for litter. One of the reasons that the Aquatic Alliance first started doing these projects was to do litter cleanups along Connoquenessing Creek, and they've kept that theme going as they've done access work as well. In southwestern Pennsylvania, a new access in Riverside serves as a takeout for the Stony Creek River. This project was completed by the Ben's Creek Canoe Club, and the section of the Stony Creek that goes from Faustwell down to Riverside Park is very popular with whitewater boaters. If you're interested in a more mellow paddle, you can go from Riverside down through the Saddleback Gap on the Conemaugh River to take out in Seward, where we have 2 other additional canoe access sites. The access site at Riverside is very well done. You can see that the Canoe Club has taken great pride in their work. They've hand placed the stone ramp, and this is very similar to the access in Faustwell. Definitely a very well-established and well-done project. In the PA Wilds region, one of the most popular and visited regions for outdoor recreation in Pennsylvania, WPC has completed 4 access sites, the most recent one being at Wyckoff Run. This was a project that was funded to the Bucktail Watershed Association and Cameron County Conservation District, and could serve as a takeout for paddling on either the Driftwood Branch, the Bennett's Branch, or the main stem of Cinemahoning Creek itself. The Conservation District and Watershed Associations improved the parking area here and added a stabilized path down to the river's edge. This is also one of the few access sites on our projects where you might be able to see an elk or 2 as you float downstream. And then lastly, I wanted to talk about a new access site we have on Pine Creek. Pine Creek, of course, is very well known for outdoor recreation, as well as being known as the home of Pennsylvania's Grand Canyon. We've worked with the North Central Pennsylvania Conservancy, as well as Tidon State Forest for an access located very near the mouth of Pine Creek, near the small town of Avis. And one of the things that's very interesting about these sorts of access sites is the connection to rails to trails that so often is intertwined with canoe access sites because the railroads share the same corridor. So this access in Avis is just adjacent to the Pine Creek Rail Trail, includes a larger parking area, as well as another stabilized ramp to get down into the water. To date, the Canoe Access Program has funded 47 organizations to complete 80 sites on 33 waterways. As I mentioned before, if you're interested in finding more out about this, you can go to the story map page on WPC's Canoe Access section of our website. Next, I'd like to introduce Mara Fielden, who's going to talk about our Gardens and Green Space program.
Thank you, Eli. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to start by talking about our community forestry program. The 2020 year started off with all of our volunteer events being suspended until early summer. Being that we're the Community Gardens and Green Space Department, not having that community element was a little difficult for us to navigate at first, but we hit it out of the park once we got our footing. All of our spring community forestry projects, which normally take place in the heart of the pandemic during March, April, and into early May, were put on hold until the fall to keep community members and our staff safe. Fortunately, the City of Pittsburgh Department of Public Works offered a lot of support. They played an essential role in helping to deliver all of our large trees safely to the communities. This allowed us to still award all of our 2020 Tree Vitalize community grant applications across the City of Pittsburgh and in Allegheny County. Once the trees were safely delivered, thanks to the support from City Forestry, our staff then began to plant all of the trees safely and individually. Because fortunately, even while most of us, everybody in the rest of the world was on lockdown, the trees and the plants don't sleep. So we had to get them to their homes safely and on time. As Tom mentioned earlier, our work continued in the Community Garden Sustainability Fund. This is a partnership with Grow Pittsburgh, and we're able to continue working in the vegetable gardens across Allegheny County, awarding communities resources for their vegetable gardens, which include seeds, soil, tools, and other supplies necessary at a time when food security was a hot topic. We had to really help engage a lot of these communities and keep their vegetable gardens going and provide a lot of support to local food banks and residents across the region. This photo shows a community project in Polish Hill in the City of Pittsburgh where we're installing irrigation for their vegetable garden. Work continued in our community flower gardens across the region. Our volunteer events saw special safety guidelines following the CDC recommendations to keep all of our volunteers safe. So while we started planting the gardens a little bit later than normal, we were able to get all of our gardens in, and we did special tool cleaning, wearing of masks, and limiting the number of participants at any planting, just to, again, help keep everybody safe throughout the process. Sometimes we had to get a little creative. We were still able to work with a lot of corporations that were able to do so, individuals, family members. Sometimes we had to rely solely on a single family household to get a project completed on time. Speaking of getting creative, each year we rely on university students to help with our annual daffodil bulb cleaning. And with student activities being on hold for the foreseeable future in 2020, we got a little bit creative with our most reliable volunteer group, our garden stewards. A few of you are on the call today, so good to see you. The daffodil bulbs are removed every year from our downtown greening projects in the City of Pittsburgh after the spring display is done blooming. So while these bulbs are still salvageable, we harvest them and then we clean them, and we then give them away for free to patrons at the first farmers market of the year in Market Square. So the garden stewards came out in mass and helped us clean all the bulbs to get ready for the farmers market. And it was a really great opportunity to see each other at a distance after so many months of isolation. Towards the end of the year, we were able to do our first virtual thank you event for all of our garden stewards. This was a little bit different than our normal potluck that we would hold at our office, but we had over 60 participants, and we think everybody really enjoyed it, and it was great to see each other. Finally, this photo shows our special projects coordinator, Kelly, giving a planting demonstration to the Greater Pittsburgh Hotel Association. They came out and helped us install all of our spring pansies across our downtown planters in the city of Pittsburgh. And it's the first time we used volunteers in a long time to do this work, and it was a huge help. Everything takes a little bit longer these days to do, to make sure that everybody's safe, and having them out there with us was a really big help. And finally, I just want to say the Gardens and Green Space Department could not have done any of this work without our volunteers. This was a year where we needed a little bit of color and brightness to help get us through, and we were able to do so with everybody's support. So again, thank you so much. I now want to pass the torch to Justin Gunther, Vice President of Fallingwater.
All right, thank you so much, Mara. And I would just like to begin by saying thank you as well. And thanks to all of the members that helped support Fallingwater during the pandemic through the Fallingwater Needs You campaign, or even if you just came out for a visit to the site, that of course helped support our operations. And also a huge thank you to all of the Fallingwater staff. Their nimbleness and creativity and innovation throughout all of this is truly remarkable. So I just wanted to begin by saying thank you there. It's really been a time of reinvention for us here at Fallingwater. And the biggest part of that reinvention occurred in our public tour program, which is what I'd like to highlight for you all today. So when Fallingwater reopened last summer after about 3 months of closure, we had to reinvent the entire tour program. We embarked on an entirely new lineup of both guided and self-guided exterior experiences. We kept the inside of the house closed throughout it all. And what this allowed us to do was really focus on the primary message of Fallingwater, which is how Frank Lloyd Wright integrated the architecture into its landscape, how he created harmony between nature and the built environment. And even though visitors weren't allowed to go inside, they really connected with these new exterior experiences that we were providing. And we got lots of wonderful positive feedback from our visitors. And because we weren't taking visitors inside the house throughout all of last year, we still wanted to provide some interpretation of the interior for our audiences. So we did that virtually. We started a program called A Closer Look. And in addition to giving online visitors glimpses of different rooms of the interior or different parts of our collection, because we were charging for this, it also gave us a much needed additional revenue stream during all of last year. It's a successful program that we will continue to build upon moving into the future. So a key benchmark that we always use here at Fallingwater to measure performance is our annual visitation. And this graph charts visitation from its first year of operation in 1964 all the way through last year of 2020. And I think if you look at the end of the graph, you see that precipitous drop down to the year 2020. 2020 was our third lowest year of visitation, coming in only after the first year, 1964, and the year 1969. With the pandemic easing up, with vaccinations on the rise, with museums opening their doors again, we're really anticipating a turn here back in the upward direction. We'll still be probably at about 50% of normal operations throughout this year, but definitely moving our way back in the right direction. And we've made two significant changes to the tour program this year. The first of them deals with the number of people on each of our guided tours. All during the pandemic, to keep people safe and to appropriately social distance, we limited individual tours to individual households. So if you had 4 people in your pod, the tour was limited to 4. If you had 2 people, the tour was limited to 2. But what we've done this year is we've started allowing different households on individual tours, up to 6 people. So we're allowing 6 people per tour. And what this will do is really help us begin to grow that visitation number. Also, what we did, which is what Tom mentioned in his introduction, is we've reopened the doors to the house. But we're not doing tours like we used to do them pre-pandemic. We learned from last year with our exterior tours, and we've created a new hybrid experience called our guided architectural tour, which blends outdoor interpretation with indoor interpretation. So you're getting some in-depth exploration of the grounds and how Wright integrated the house into the landscape. Then you're going into significant spaces in the interior. Of course, the most important interior space is the first floor living room. And because we're spacing groups apart, 10 minutes apart, these individual groups of 6 people really get some intimate alone time in the living room, which is something that wasn't happening pre-pandemic. All the groups also get to go behind the scenes into the kitchen and the servant sitting room of the house, which again, pre-pandemic, most of our guided tours weren't getting to see these spaces. What this allows us to do is interpret the kind of back of the house, how the Kaufmans used Fallingwater for its purpose, which really was to entertain guests and to enjoy retreat out in the wilderness. And then visitors will end their tour up in the guest house by experiencing the living room and guest bedroom of the guest house. But both the past 2 weekends, which are our first 2 weekends for these tours, we've fully booked them out. So really positive sign that things are moving in the right direction for us with our visitation. We're also piloting 3 new food-based tours. We're doing each season something called a forest to table dinner. And then each weekend from now till September, we're doing brunch and sunset tours. So all of these experiences couple an in-depth tour of the house with a table service, fine dining meal. Our chef, Tom Shuttlesworth, is curating those meals, bringing in seasonal flavors from what you would discover in the forested landscape out here at Fallingwater. A really successful program we started last year was our family field trips. Because we were no longer able to host large groups of school children, we started doing individual private tours for families called our family field trip. So as they're exploring the outside of the house and the landscape, our educators lead the family through a series of educational exercises that meet PA educational standards. And because of our Lodging Partners in Education program, we're able to provide these family field trips for free for our local community, which has been a wonderful way to continue to engage with those communities directly within our region. And finally, to further enrich the tour experience, we're activating the Visitor Center's Spire Gallery with a rotating exhibition this season on Joseph Urban. Joseph Urban was a Viennese-American designer, and Edgar Kaufman employed him to create new designs for a remodel of the department store in the 1920s. So you can see these wonderful Art Deco drawings that highlight how progressive the Kaufmans were in their thinking and their taste making. So I hope all of you will come out and visit us this season and experience the many programs that we're offering as we all slowly emerge from this thing. So with that, I will turn things over to Liz Cuthbert, our Vice President of Finance and Administration. So Liz.
Thank you, Justin. Now that we've heard about the various ways to connect with WPC during the pandemic, I'm here to answer the question in the back of everybody's mind. How did you do financially in 2020? As you can imagine, last year was quite a challenging and eventful year for us financially. We started out the year with our highest operating budget over the last decade of $24 million, then quickly reduced spending across the organization and closed Fallingwater by the end of the first quarter. To mitigate financial impacts, we applied for and received emergency COVID operating grants and a Paycheck Protection Program loan. We strategically sold unrestricted invested assets to help support Fallingwater and continued to fundraise throughout the year, bringing our total annual operating revenues to $19.1 million. If you've seen this pie chart before, you will notice that it looks a little different than in prior years. Fallingwater admissions and sales were about $5 million less than they were the previous year. And as a result of the lost revenue at Fallingwater, we added a new slice to the pie with the one-time sale of unrestricted Fallingwater invested assets to help fund the operating deficits. And while many things changed last year, some things stayed the same. The generosity and support of our loyal members and donors helped to support WPC in a time of uncertainty. And we continued to have a nicely diversified revenue stream that does not have too much reliance on any one source. And 2020 was a perfect example as to why this diversification of revenue is so important for our organization. Our 2020 operating expenses of $22.6 million showed a slight decrease from 2019, mostly in Fallingwater, due to the closure of the house and the limited operating capacity once it was reopened. And from this chart, we can see that for every dollar we receive, 84 cents goes back into our programs and projects. I am happy to report that we received a clean audit opinion on our financial statements, no compliance findings or question costs, and no management letter from our auditors with suggestions for improvement. Our 2020 operating deficit was $1.3 million, which is mostly due to the funding of salaries and benefits across the organization with our Paycheck Protection Program loan. Our total net assets at December 31st was $109 million, which includes all of our accumulated land conservation as well as Fallingwater. Our true endowment, which is a gift from a donor that must be maintained in perpetuity, was $14.7 million, with the spendable portion of it being $9 million. The remainder of our endowment is made up of Fallingwater and our permanent land holdings. Despite the pandemic, the markets had favorable returns last year, resulting in an annual investment return of 15.1% for our investment portfolio in 2020. Which will significantly help us as we prepare our budget in the upcoming year. This chart summarizes the results of the National Association of College and University Business Officers annual study of endowments, which includes colleges, universities, and education-related foundations across the United States. And although we aren't a university, the study is a useful tool to gauge the performance of WPC's investment portfolio. Focusing on the blue band, you will see that the Conservancy's portfolio has outperformed all size classifications in the study over the 1, 3, and 5-year time period as of June 30th, 2020. And while 2020 was a difficult year, we continued to rank in the top quartiles throughout December 31st, 2020, in comparison to all endowments and foundations, and have done a consistently good job in stewarding our funds. Moving forward to 2021, our investment portfolio continued with positive returns, resulting in a positive 2.9% return as of March 31st, 2021, as the markets maintained their upward momentum during the quarter as the improving pace of vaccines drove hope that restrictions on activities would gradually be lifted as the year progresses. As we approach 2021 from a budget perspective, we prepared a conservative operating budget for this year with the assumption that the pandemic will continue. As the year progresses and restrictions ease, we will continue to adapt and amend the budget to reflect increased visitation at Fallingwater, and will reverse our operating expense reductions across the organization as appropriate. Thank you for joining me for this year's Treasurer's Report. And Susan will now lead us through the other business of the annual meeting and the election of directors.
Thank you, Liz. Before we move on, I just want to say a special thank you to Tom and Tyson and Eli and Mara, Justin and Liz. They have led and done incredible work on all the projects and achievements of this year during this very, very, very difficult time. Thank you all so very much. And at this time, we need to continue our business meeting. It's not as much fun as listening to our projects, but it is what we need to do. You were notified, the members were notified by postcard and email back in March. This is all in accordance with our bylaws, that you have notification received of our annual meeting. The bylaws state that 21 members entitled to vote, that would be members here or on Zoom at the annual meeting, must be present at this annual meeting to constitute a quorum. And I have been notified that quorum exists, so we can proceed with quorum present. So the purpose of this meeting is to elect the directors of the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy, and then also to transact any business that might properly come before this group at this meeting. Right now, I would like to provide a report from the nominating committee. The nominating committee is made up of a board of directors who are currently involved in the nominating committee. And those members include Mike Boyle, Dan Neidick, Steve Robinson, and me. So we as the nominating committee are charged with adding new directors to the board of directors. And for that reason, we are nominating, we would like you to consider voting for the following 3 candidates who have come before the nominating committee and are willing to share their time, their expertise, and their energy as board of directors. They are the class of 2024. Those 3 people joining the board are Ta Enos, and Ta is the CEO of the Pennsylvania Wilds Center for Entrepreneurship. Candace Hilliard, who is the executive director of the Pennsylvania Route 6 Heritage Alliance. And third, Donna Fisher. Donna is the district manager of the Blair County Conservation District and also the coordinator of the Blair County Agricultural Land Preservation Program. We would like to extend a very warm welcome to those 3 people who will be joining our board of directors following this meeting. The committee nominating committee would also like to nominate for re-election the following people to the board of directors, and you will see them on your screen. This is a class of 2024. David Berensfeld, Beverlyn Elliott, Felix Fakui, Carolyn Rizza, PhD, Timothy Tyreen, Jeffrey Dunn, MD, James Finley, PhD, Carolyn Hendricks, MD, and Samuel Smith. So we'll need a motion from the floor to nominate, accept this slate of officers. A nomination?
Susan, this is Justin Gunther. I'll move to elect this slate of directors.
Thank you, Justin. And a second.
Second by Liz Cuthbert.
Thank you, Liz. The motion is that the nominating committee's report of these 3 new nominees and the directors for re-election be accepted, and that each of the nominees elected serve for a period of 3 years. We'll wait just one moment for electronic voting. And you see on your screen now in front of you, do you approve the motion that the nominating committee the nominating committee report be accepted and that each of the nominees be elected as members of the board? Either say yes or no. And we'll just wait 1 minute to allow all of you to respond.
Thanks everyone for voting. All the nominated directors have been elected.
Thank you very, very much. I think that was you, Nicole. Thank you. Thanks to all of our directors who serve on the board for, again, their valuable time, their expertise, their knowledge, and efforts to support and encourage the Conservancy's work. At this time, We also would like to take a moment to recognize some very important members, our annual meeting members, and that is the Evergreen Circle group. This group of individuals are the long-standing members, and they have supported the Conservancy, its projects and works every year for at least 15 out of the last 20 years. So thank you to those Evergreen members. You are invaluable to the Conservancy. Believe it or not, this ends our meeting for today. We thank all of you for taking the time to join us on this Zoom meeting. And we're so looking forward to seeing you in your hiking boots next year at the barn at Fallingwater. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you, everyone.
Okay.